When I was watching Rugrats the other day, I realized that there was something missing. A villain. And when I think of villain, I think of a scary opposing force that will leave no hope for the heroes until the very end when they figure out how to beat him at the very last second. Or if it's an actual good story, they'll figure out a way to defeat him and then good character development happens. So what the purpose of this lecture is to pretty much help you guys out with my tips on, I guess, how you can make a believable villain that people actually find menacing, or a believable anti-hero that people either love or hate. Who comes to mind when you think of a good villain? What comes to mind for me is Dracula, Freddy Krueger. Make your villain menacing. What's the point of a villain? To have him provide an obstacle for the heroes to pass. How do you usually do that? Usually with an air of menace. Having a teddy bear attack your heroes with nothing more than a cotton swab, for example. Not a very good villain. If you gave that teddy bear, I don't know, a chainsaw, that'll make it a little more menacing. My point here is just to make your villain sinister. And Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame is actually a very good example. He's supposed to be a religious man of power, but he's corrupted to such a point where, he would either want to sleep with a gypsy woman or see her burn in hell, and he will do anything to get that. An example that I know of is Freddy Krueger. He's menacing, at least in the first movie, before he actually started flinging out cheesy pun after cheesy pun. He was a freaky as shit nightmare man who could kill you in many different ways in your nightmares, and he had a glove with razors on it. Here's the thing. There's a difference between menacing and flat out ridiculous. Like a gory skeleton with a fire sword who spits out bad puns and is named Frida. Flat out ridiculous villains won't be taken seriously either. So what you need to do is find a balance between what you think looks menacing and what will be taken seriously. Really, what you need to do is just, make your villain menacing. In order to have a good villain, you also need to actually give them a coherent personality. If a villain doesn't have a personality, then really they're just nondescript, evil, and boring. Is your villain a smartass? I don't know, Chucky or Freddy Krueger? Is he charming? AKA, I don't know, any vampire villain that's really out there nowadays? Or is he just flat out evil? Or is he a creeper? You just need to have a clear personality to your villain, or else they'll be just nondescript and boring. For example, if your villain is a silent angel of death with a big-ass sword like Sephiroth, then what distinguishes him from being a Sephiroth ripoff? You need to have a distinguishing trait, is what I'm saying. And a personality helps to make that distinction. So you really, really, really need to emphasize that and pay attention to giving your villain a personality that won't A, bore the shit out of your contestants, and B, will make this fun for other people. Or will make the villain an actual threat. To have a menacing villain, you also need to give them a good personality. Those two kind of intertwine with each other. Personality and menacing villains aren't the only thing that you actually need. You also need to know what his plans are. If a villain's plans are incoherent, and you have no idea what they are, and they're just too ambiguous to tell, why would you care about said villain? Just for personal example, from hosting Nightmare Tournament 2, I've come to realize that up to round 4, in my personal opinion, the antagonists of that tournament, Nightmare's ultimate ambitions and plans, were a little ambiguous. What I had to do was actually develop more story in that department, so the people actually care about what they're fighting against. Your villain needs to have a plan, because not only is it good storytelling, but it'll give your contestants some impetus. Use that to build their stories with. If the villain has a good overall plan, the creator needs to flesh it out in their story and execute the plan well. The villain's ultimate ambition or plan is something that can be there for contestants to build on top of. When I was running the first Nightmare Tournament, my villain my villain had an ultimate plan, and that was basically to have the contestants kill each other for his entertainment. And all 64 of the contestants who entered the tournament pretty much used that and ran with it. and made their own stories out of it. You need to have a villain with a good overall plan or scheme, not only so the characters have something to fight against, but so there is some sort of story that your contestants can build their stories off of. Just a word of warning, if a villain's ultimate plan is poorly executed or too ambiguous, why would anybody care about your villain? If you have a boring and ambiguous, plan for your villain, then it doesn't matter how cool of a personality they have or how menacing they are. If your villain ultimately has no purpose, then why should he even be there? The final point in the lecture about the villain is something that's more optional. If your villain is to be sympathized with, as in, if your villain is not just a total dick, but actually has, some essence that makes him, that makes people feel sorry for him or feel a little sorry for him, what you need to do is make it where the audience can actually sympathize with your villain a little bit, in addition to hating his guts. In Freddy vs. Jason, you had the character Jason Voorhees. I mean, usually in the Friday the 13th series, he was a hulking menace that ran around and killed hapless teenagers. But in Freddy vs. Jason, you had not one but two of these personalities, including Freddy Krueger, who was an evil pedophile. What they did there was actually make Jason a little sympathetic, because you know how Freddy Krueger uses his, mind-raping nightmares to mess with and then kill his victims? He sort of did the same thing to Jason. Those scenes in Freddy vs. Jason actually let the audience have the capability of feeling sorry for a usually indestructible, hateable, killing machine. Another example, pretty much, is the new Nightmare on Elm Street. They added a new dimension to Freddy Krueger, where it was sort of ambiguous as to whether he actually, touched kids in a bad way, or if the parents of the town actually flipped their shit for no reason and burned Freddy Krueger alive for no reason. The new Nightmare on Elm Street movie actually made that ambiguous. It was pretty neat because you could actually sympathize with Freddy a little bit if you thought that he did nothing wrong. Your villain can be sympathized with, but you just need to make it where it's believable with the audience. You need to develop your villain's character from the get-go to actually have the audience sympathize with him if he is to be sympathized with. The importance there is you need to develop your villain's personality as to whether, they're evil, they're a smartass who's evil, or they can be sympathized with. That concludes my lecture on villains, where basically I just give you guys a few tips as to pretty much, what I think can go into making a good villain. As in, you need to make your villain menacing, but not flat out ridiculous, where nobody will take them seriously, like a gory skeleton with a flaming sword who spits out bad puns. You need to actually develop a good personality for your villain. You need to have good plans and ambitions for your villain. And, this is optional, if you're going to have your villain sympathized with, then what you need to do is actually develop the character throughout your story. Don't make the audience sympathize with him out of the blue when he's been an evil dick the entire time. That doesn't work.